welcome back to another Reddit video. I'm trying to hit 100k by the end of the year, and we're already so close, guys. We're definitely gonna make it. Thank you so much. Please help me here in the home stretch. You guys really mean so much to me. You are just, I'm not gonna get sappy here, but thank you. Now today we're gonna read some Reddit ghost stories. Ghosts are creepy, interesting, scary, and I love Reddit stories. And so do you guys. So let's start. Also, be sure to follow my Instagram and join my Discord, yeah. Almost forgot that. Midnight snack for the headless man. When me and my girlfriend Jenna moved into this new apartment, we were high in hopes of making it big in the YouTuber world. Our paranormal investigations channel had grown to 10,000 subscribers in a matter of months, and we were hopeful that we could turn it to 100,000 very soon. We moved into this new place because of the numerous haunting locations nearby that we could film and investigate. The town was filled with ghost stories told by interesting people who claimed them to be real. I already love this place, Jenna said, settling into the spooky vibes of the new world that we found ourselves in. Me too, babe, I replied, looking out of the window, taking in the view of the town soaked in musical rain. What I didn't know at the time was that my wish for finding proof and belief in the paranormal was soon going to come true, but in a way that was way too personal to be safe. We worked late that night, excitedly preparing lists of places we would go to for shooting our videos and setting our targets for the YouTube channel. After we had scheduled our work for the entire month, we simply took a breath of satisfaction and went to bed. We, however, were not fated to an entire night of sleep and were disturbed by a noise coming outside our bedroom door. "What the fuck?" I blurted out as I heard the soft wailing coming from the living room. I pushed my girlfriend awake, and just as she was about to ask me why I woke her up, she heard it too. We both sat up in our beds and stared at our bedroom door for a few minutes while I decided my next move. "Let me check it. It's probably nothing," I said and got up calmly, even though my heart sounded like a drum beating against my chest. There was no object I could pick up as a weapon in the room, so I just knocked on the door. "Is anyone there?" I asked in a bold voice. "We should call the cops," Jenna said, clearly sensing this wasn't nothing. I brushed her off and opened the door slightly and took a peek, and my heart stopped. What I was staring at made absolutely no sense. Through the moonlight coming from the windows, I could make out a tall man standing in our kitchen, wailing and hitting his arms on our fridge. I stared at him for a few long minutes, the questions of my girlfriend failing to register in my head, and then I noticed it. The man had no head and no hands. He kept crying and hitting his handless arms in the fridge again and again and again, while I stared at it, completely numb and terrified at the same time. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jenna said with gritted teeth and pulled me back into the bedroom with a jerk and closed the door. "What did you see? Are we in danger?" I don't know," I said simply and calmly, the words not justifying the array of terrifying emotions I felt at the time. It was hard to breathe and my eyes were now lined with tears. Jenna was visibly concerned and wanted a signal to call for help, but I shook my head. "Just sleep," I told her, and got back into the sheets, and I slept. That night for me hosted a very long nightmare in which I kept asking into the void just one thing. If he had no mouth, how was he wailing? The next morning I was woken up by Jenna, who brought me toasted bread and boiled eggs. "Honey, what happened last night?" she asked, concerned. "I checked outside in the morning. Nothing has been stolen. Please tell me what you saw." I just sighed and told her about what I saw last night. "I went numb, I'm sorry. We should have called for help." She held me tight and comforted me. Then she handed me my breakfast and went to the other side of the bed, put down her laptop, and started typing away. I ate my breakfast while she worked for around 10 minutes, and then she screamed, "What?" I looked at her, suddenly trying to figure out what happened. She turned to me and smiled the biggest smile I've seen on her face. She brought her laptop to me and showed me what she had been doing. She had put a post on social media asking if anyone knows anything about a headless man from our town and got a lot of replies, which were all mostly bullshit, but then she received an email. The person who sent the email claimed to have lived in the town and mentioned the address he used to live at, and it was ours. He lived at our house. I stared at my girlfriend in disbelief while she pointed at me to continue reading. The rest of the email said how we got visited by the headless man daily, and the only thing you can do against him is ignore him by just opening your fridge. The email claimed that the headless man was there to get a midnight snack. "What the hell?" I whispered as I finished reading the email. "I mean, let's see if the solution works, but why are you so giddy we're being haunted by a creepy guy?" Jenna just made a disappointed face and said, "We can record him. We've been going here and there trying to script fake paranormal events, but this is the real deal. This is what will make us famous. Someone else has dealt with this too, so we can as well. I was a bit skeptical, but if I'm being honest, I was excited too. I know it's weird and hard to explain how being haunted by a man with no head could lead us to being happy and cheerful, but you have to remember, we worked our entire lives with horror. Once we got a bit used to this new truth, it was easy to ignore the dangers of it. So we set up the cameras in our kitchen and opened the fridge door at 10 a.m. before retiring to bed. We both took our shifts sleeping with one person staying guard for when the man returns. But he didn't. A month passed by and we didn't get any work done. Our subscribers were complaining about us not posting any content, and we had started losing subscribers who thought we had killed the channel. But we were hopeful that one day the man would return, and he did. That night I had stayed awake till 2 a.m. and then could not hold off my sleep for any longer, so I woke up Jenna and took my turn to sleep. And then I woke up in the morning with Jenna nowhere in the room. My instincts jumped into place suddenly, and I called for Jenna. I ran outside and saw that the kitchen door was now closed and everything looked normal. I called Jenna on her phone but found it in the bathroom. She was nowhere to be seen, and so I did what I feared I would have to do to find the truth. See the camera recording. The camera recorded nothing strange until 2:53 a.m., but then the camera flashed all white, and when it showed our kitchen again, the man was there. The man wailed with no head and kept banging his arms in the fridge even though the door was open. If he was here for the snack, why wasn't he taking it? Jenna must have asked the same question, I imagine, because I saw her head peeking out of the bedroom door. But for some reason I'll never know, she decided to walk outside, her feet trying to hold her back because of the terror I'm sure she must have felt. She walked to the kitchen and simply stood in front of the man, not saying or doing anything. The man, no, the monster, took notice of her, and even though he had no eyes to see, I know he saw her. And what happened next has crushed my soul forever. Jenna must have come to her senses after a while and started backing away into the bedroom. But as she made it halfway through, the figure let out a piercing scream and hopped weirdly to Jenna, his arms flailing around in every direction. He pinned her down, the camera flashed, and when it came back, there was no man. And no Jenna. I know I am to blame for what happened to Jenna. I slept that night despite knowing the dangers. My heart is broken now, but I find some comfort in the hope that the story reaches someone who needs to hear it, and the person understands that the headless man is there for a midnight snack. But the snack is not in the fridge. The snack is you. There's an extra ghost in Disney World's Haunted Mansion ride. A few weeks ago, my sister and I went to Disney World. After riding It's a Small World 3 times, she loves it, ugh, and waiting 2 hours in line for the Seven Dwarves Mine Train, we hit up the Haunted Mansion. Since it was 10 minutes till close, it was only us and some teenage couple on the ride. They're making out back there, Megan complained. I can hear them. Ugh. Did you see their matching skull tattoos? So edgy. The Doom buggy rolled into the Hall of Doors. If you're unfamiliar with the ride, here's a video of it. Note that I did not take this video. Clank, clank. The knockers twitched, and the doors creaked and buckled as if holding something within. And then the Doom buggy stopped. We are experiencing technical difficulties, the automated voice said through the speakers. Ugh, this is the most boring part of the ride. I know, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Such chintzy special effects, too. I mean, doors and knocking sounds, wow, they really broke the budget. Blair! I turned. That door, she said excitedly, pointing behind us. It's open. I leaned out of the Doom buggy. In the darkness behind us, one of the doors was hanging open, spilling green light into the hallway. Okay, now that's cool. Is it new? Must be. Too bad we already passed it, I said, turning back around. They probably have some really cool animatronic in there or something. The ride jolted forward. We rolled into the seance room. Madame Leota's face glowed from the crystal ball, looking out at all of us. Blair, Megan said, her voice quaking. I followed her gaze. She was looking across the crystal ball at the other Doom buggies. In the ghastly white light, I could see them, and they were all empty. The teenagers, I said, my voice hoarse. They're gone. Before I could take a second look, we swung out of the seance room. The buggy climbed through the darkness up into the hallway overlooking the ballroom. Are you sure they were sitting behind us? Megan whispered. Weren't they sitting in front of us? Or maybe they got out of the buggy. Why would they do that? To have sex? Ew, that's... We jolted to a stop. We are experiencing technical difficulties. The same automated voice rang out of the speakers. At least we get a good view this time, I said, watching the ghosts twirl and dance below. Clunk. Megan jumped. What was that? She said, her voice quavering. Probably just the machinery, I said. But I was scared too. I took a deep breath and tried to focus on the ballroom below. It really is the best scene of the ride. 6 couples waltzed to a creepy tune played by an organist. My heart stopped. There weren't 6. There were 7. And then I saw it. One of the couples was twirling slightly off beat, sticking out from the rest. And on each one's arm was a skull tattoo. It's them, the ghosts, Megan started. They aren't ghosts, I said, the terror of realization kicking in. You know how this is done, right? The Pepper's ghost illusion. The ghosts are reflections in the glass of animatronics in a hidden room. This is not the time for Disney trivia, Blair. We're not seeing ghosts, I said. We're seeing reflections of them. Or, my voice caught in my throat. Or their bodies. Clunk. The sound echoed off the dark halls, louder this time. Megan grabbed my arm. I peered out the side of the doom buggy. All I could see was the hallway and the train of empty buggies snaking back into the darkness. Clunk. And then, the buggy lurched forward. We rolled through the attic, then into the graveyard. Fake stars dotted the purple sky. Beyond the iron gates, a haunting melody wafted towards us. Animatronics of ghosts, glowing eerie greens and purples from the black lights, twitched and lurched among the tombstones. The doom buggy rolled past the iron gates, and then it halted to a stop. Clunk. We have to get out of here, I said, standing up. What? Are you insane? We can't just wait for it to get us, I yelled. I looped one leg over the safety bar. Please remain in the doom buggy at all times, the speakers boomed. Megan looked at me with wide eyes. We have to go, Megan, come on. Clunk. It was louder now, from the edge of the graveyard. She knocked and leapt out of the buggy. We ran as fast as we could, carefully winding between the tombstones, past a band of ghosts playing music, past 2 ghosts on a seesaw, past a ghostly tea party. Blair? What? Why'd they stop? I looked up. The band of ghosts had suddenly stopped trumpeting, drumming. The seesaw had stopped teetering. The tea party ghosts had set down their cups. They were all still, and every eye was on us. Run, I screamed. It was all a blur of purple and blue, eerie glows and still eyes. We ran as fast as we could, and the clunks got louder and louder. We didn't stop until we were out of the ride, huffing and puffing in the damp Florida air. I grabbed the nearest cast member I could find. There's something wrong, I huffed. There's something wrong with the ride. We were just on it, and she looked back at me, sweetly. Don't worry, everything will be fine. What ride did you say it was? The Haunted Mansion. That's impossible, she replied, in the same sickening, sweet tone of voice. What? We had to close it down early because of a malfunction, she said. You mean nobody's been allowed on the ride since 9 o'clock? Don't let them in. Addiction took our mother slowly, rocked her through it and sung her to sleep, sunk deep into the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell out, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7 and I kept them in a matchbox. The missing pieces of her kept safe so she wouldn't be lost forever. Maybe one day we could put her back together. Our house fell down around us and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceilings had water damage and the bottom stairs had dry rot. And in the winters, the radiators would bleed rust. But it was still our house and Annie made it a home. My sister Annie mothered me, with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance barefoot on the living room carpet, music channel on full volume on the TV, shaking our hips before they were fully grown. She always let me shower first so the water was hot, never complaining when she had to make do with cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tangles. Annie was dark-haired like her father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe, like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. Keeping up with our mother was impossible, and we learned from a young age we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she shone. Would wake us up at 3 a.m. with pancakes, dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes when the weather was right and she had enough being drunk alone, she would call our school up and tell them we had both come down with summer sickness and we'd drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old in the backseat of the car, coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her bend over our kitchen sink. From behind, I couldn't tell who was mother and who was daughter. Radio up and windows down, blowing the sky inside. When she was drinking heavy, she'd be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed with glitter and black. Sometimes she'd be gone a day or two, She would never tell us when. One day we'd just wake up to an empty house and the fridge packed full. Post-it note on the front with a smear of Mom's lipstick and the outline of a kiss, telling us she'd be back soon. Sometimes she'd bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays. Smoke up to the ceiling, Mom lost in the haze. We'd sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music that would blast until the AM. And wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning, asking us where we kept the coffee. When Mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food, refrigerator a gaping hole in the wall. She'd chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with half blue moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch, she looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window and then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seats, head resting in the crater of my collarbones. When Mom drank too much, she was the worst. She'd laugh too hard and too long at anything and everything until her mouth started to shake and she was crying at the breakfast table into her cereal. Annie shut down when Mom was like this, went somewhere deep inside herself where nobody could hurt her. She'd stay up until the morning watching old black and white movies on TV, whispering the lines she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5, I'd cry when I'd find Mom passed out cold in her bed. Sure, she would never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears, tell me she was only sleeping just like the princesses in my storybook. We'd sit on Mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick Mom up off the bathroom floor again and again, and Annie would put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face and the vomit from her mouth, changing her clothes if she'd pissed herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October, and I was 13, Annie 16. It was a Wednesday night, and Mom had been gone for 2 days. She'd called us that morning from a payphone, voice slurring down the line, telling us that she was having the best time with all her new friends, hoping we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip glosses and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she'd gotten the money for it. I didn't care. We'd taken the bus to the beach with Jane, eaten the birthday cake she had made for me, sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness and the sea, and I savored every bite and scrape of sugar against my tongue. It tasted like sweetness and the sea, and I savored every bite and scrape of sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her shitty Nokia as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that Mom wouldn't come home, that she'd just stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, me and Annie weren't speaking. Anger hung heavy between us, seeping through the floorboards. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We'd both laughed, Annie throwing her head back, gap between her front teeth catching the light. When I bent to pick her up, I'd caught her breath, warm against the freckles of my cheeks. I let go of her arms and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. Her breath was heavy with whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too, couldn't watch her fall again and again. Just like Mom, I knew she'd never get back up. I'd stared down at her, blonde hair fallen into her eyes, and all I could see was our mother. Feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turned loose. I'd run for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, glass shards shining like we dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them, pieces we could never put back. Outside, through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold. Clouds a mess of pink and cream smeared against the horizon. I cried then, watching Annie on her knees picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things even when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, stomach turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food made not in a microwave. Sheets at the table, Tammy Wynette singing softly from the CD player. Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, with every bite I forgave her. Mom never cooked dinner or remembered my favorite was spaghetti ever since I was a kid, or stayed sober long enough to sit up at a table. Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane, and I cracked the window to let it out into the dark. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen to it as it was coming from far off, crying. I figured it was Mika, the 2-year-old next door, having a tantrum loud enough for us to catch, or maybe even Lucky Strike the cat that chunkies down the street, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around, winding over my ankles, but Annie always stopped me, saying once you start giving, they never stop taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch, and we sat on the plastic beach chairs watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside, and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations, and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Ah, yes, that one there is the Coors Light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines, right next to the ashtray, left there by angels on a smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish on it, all your dreams come true, said Annie, grinning. She stopped laughing, voice quieter, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy. Let's wish. So we did. The sound of crying interrupted us. It was closer this time and definitely human. We turned to each other confused. Annie shrugged and I squinted out into the black. It sounded like a baby, lost and tired and alone. It must be Mika, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe he walked around the back. Shit, do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply, and I sighed, rolling my eyes. Guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like it might rain, fresh and clean and growing. A promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice was strained. I turned to her smiling. It died on my face when I saw the look of her own. Get inside now. She was staring out into the dark past me, opening the door with one hand behind her, fingers fumbling on the catch. I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I'd found what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence was a person, crouched with their knees tucked up neat under the chin, arms wrapped around their legs. Their mouth hung wide, softly opening and closing as he cried, like a child lost in the dark. Not like a child, but someone pretending, mimicking the sound, open and closed out in the blackness. Suddenly they straightened, snapping upright, face still hidden by the black. They were tall and thin, too thin to be a normal person. Panic made me move, animal instincts left over from the days we lived up in the trees, carrying me forward. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We watched as the person slowly walked towards the house, steps deliberate and long. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight, and turned me to face her, holding my shoulders. Don't turn around, Emmy, don't turn around. Instinctively, I started to look over my shoulder out into the darkness. Annie grabbed my face hard and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in, grounding herself. I looked down at our fingers interlocked, both of us grown from the same bones. I'm gonna call the cops, and everything is gonna be... Her voice faltered, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes, dripping like the promise of rain. Annie never cried. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered, and bile crawled its way up my throat. Her phone was upstairs charging. A soft tap, tap, tapping filled the silence. Annie turned to the window, eye whites showing her eyes were so wide. It was the sound of someone's forehead against the glass. Slowly, over and over. They started to speed up, faster and faster, skin meeting glass until they were slamming into the window, hard enough to shake the panes. The tapping stopped, and I was about to ask Annie if I could look now, when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and the loudest slam yet. Whoever was in our yard just smashed their face hard enough into the window to break it. We ran upstairs, 2 at a time, skipping the ones caved in with dry rot on instinct. I turned behind me once, and Annie yanked my face back before I could see. The sound of broken glass echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom, locking the door. A thin, wailing cry, like a baby calling for its mother, filled the hallway, trapped between the walls and locked doors. Annie threw her back against the door, feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching the knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. I did the same, shoulder to shoulder. Slow footsteps started on the stairs, deliberate and casual. The crying had become mocking, almost laughter, shrill bursts of sound and then giggles, high-pitched and abruptly stopping before starting again. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the distinct sound of it slamming open. They were looking for us. What the fuck is going on? I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that I couldn't stop falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next door in the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, thumb pressing hard enough on the blade to bleed. I watched my sister's blood drip down her wrist, a winding red road, still pushing into my hands despite the pain. I took the knife. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched wail followed. I held my breath, could feel my heart beat in the base of my throat, a wild and frantic thing. I'm gonna get my phone from the room. I shook my head violently, about to argue. Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood in her hand, salty and sweet, like birthday cake by the ocean. Yes, I'm gonna get the phone and I'm gonna call the cops and we're gonna be okay. I shook my head again. It's the only way. When I go, I need you to lock the door and you don't open it for anything or anyone. Not for me, not for anyone. Promise me. I shook my head and Annie pressed her hand into my mouth, crushing my teeth against my lips so it made my eyes water. Yes, promise me, Em. Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair off my face, gently tucking it behind my ear. Promise, she mouthed and unlocked the door, as slowly as possible, bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the black hall outside, like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream followed, handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop one of the screws. I watched it roll towards me on the tiles, and then silence. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. Still silence. Nothing but me and my lungs slowly filling the room with my breath. Em? Came a voice through the door. I started, hands gripping the knife. Honey, what's going on? Mom? My voice cracked. Mama, is that you? I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking, trying to keep myself still. Sweetie, it's okay, just open the door. It's okay, just let me in. The handle rattled again, gentler. Just let me in, it's all okay. She banged on the door, and I took my handle off the bolt. Honey, I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother, please. Her voice broke, and she started to cry. Just let me in, baby, I'm so sorry. I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me, like when I was a kid and I'd come in off the swings with a scraped knee. Maybe this time she meant it. Maybe it would all be okay. My hand found its way to the bolt again. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. Yeah, Emily, let us in, it's all okay. My hand froze on the bolt and I tightened my grip on the knife. Annie never called me by my full name. A hand banged on the door, handle rattling. Emily, let us in! Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, voice getting louder and louder. Let us in, let us in, let us in! Over and over again, punctuated by the fists on the door. I thought about demons and monsters, all the bedtime stories we pray don't crawl out from under our bed. That's not my sister, and you're not my mother, I screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub and curled in a ball, cradling myself, knife clutched to my chest. I didn't know what it was outside that door, but I knew it wasn't Annie. It wasn't the voice that yelled at me when I changed TV channels, the one that sang me happy birthday, the one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades, the one that read me stories about princesses and never wake up. It wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low, guttural howl ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound, and then the door was kicked in. I screamed, covering my eyes, waiting to die. Arms found me and lifted me from the tub, carrying me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was carried downstairs. It was covered in long, scraping claw marks, dragged down to the floor. Pillows ripped apart covered the hallway in soft down, like it had snowed outside. I watched them drift slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms that looked like they had been torn apart by something feral. Outside in our driveway were police cars and an ambulance. In the middle of it all was Annie, bathed in blue and red light as it washed over her, lit up in the dark like a neon angel, face aglow. I threw myself from the cop's shoulder and ran to her, holding us both together, broken pieces and all, standing over all the constellations we made up. Gentle screaming came from the ambulance, which rocked occasionally. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly it made my chest ache as I understood. Turns out there was no demon, no wild animal, or bad men trying to break in. Just Mom, out of her mind on booze and drugs and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time and you never get back up. Annie had seen her in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth, track marks bulging on her forearms like unmapped roads, rail thin and desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She'd searched the kitchen for all the drink I'd thrown away, and when she hadn't found it, had come to hunt for the stash she hid in the bathroom. She hadn't wanted me, just the drugs, on the other side of the door, so high she could mimic Annie's voice almost perfectly. Turns out, the real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly. The kind that come in a bottle or a needle or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most, but it's up to you if you let them in. I guide tours at a haunted hotel. I found something I wasn't meant to see. The Stanley. You might have heard of it. It's a hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, most famous for hosting a stay from Stephen King decades ago. Turned out he liked it so much he ended up using it as the inspiration for a book you have almost definitely heard of, The Shining. The story goes he came in the winter when the staff was already prepared to leave for the colder months. He courted a few drinks in our huge empty hotel while the bartender served him ghost stories. A little while later, voila, here's Johnny. People come from all over the country hoping to find a ghost. My job is to tell you where to find them. I guide tours around the campus telling people the rehearsed, memorized stories. Stories about women who laugh and dogs that curl into your bed at night, and I'm good at it. I started last autumn, but I took to the job quickly. I'll make scary faces, I'll make eye contact with you, I'll use old passages guests don't know about popping out in front of you in places you didn't think I could be. A couple of weeks ago, I stayed overnight at the hotel for the first time. I worked a double. The room was available, and I had to open again the next day, so it just made sense. It was fun. The rooms were old, and there's a small gap at the top of the doors. At any other hotel, those would be complaints, but at the Stanley, it's part of the experience. You'll hear it all. Every creak of the floorboards, every door opening and closing, every doorknob twisting. It's all too easy to let your mind turn an insomniac neighbor into a ghost, and let's be honest, nobody comes to the Stanley for a good night's sleep. I haven't gone home since that night. Most of the employees are teens from Estes Park looking for some extra cash on the weekends, so the turnover is high. When my bosses saw me as the reliable worker I am, they gave me a standing offer to work whenever I want, so I've worked every day. The last building we visit on my tour is a tiny, shambled building on the back edge of campus. It's not really supposed to be part of the experience. Often I'll skip it entirely. But on tours where we moved a little too quickly and I needed something to fill the last few minutes of the hour the guest paid for, I'd pop in. It's a creaky old building that's been under construction for the entire time I've worked there, even though I've never once seen crews come in or out of it. Inside, a collection of old antiques welcomes you into the narrow entranceway from its only windowsill. Past that, a single hallway runs past two rooms, one on each side of the hallway until it meets its end at a locked doorway. Broken old appliances and heaps of lumber and sawdust litter the older rooms. It was really nothing special, but the air pressure inside is strange, and sometimes that causes the doors to move, which is usually enough to warrant an ear-splitting shriek or two. I use that to make up some fun, spooky stories about it. The one that seems to perform the best is all about a ghost who will lock the door from behind us from the outside. If that happens, don't panic, I'd say, tapping my radio. All I have to do is call and someone will let us out. There was a little truth to that. I don't have any keys to this building. Nobody ever locked it anyway. Funny enough though, someone did lock the door at the end of the hallway. I asked about the key once at the risk of having my secret tour stop discovered, but nobody even seems to know what I was talking about. I always used to wonder what was in there that would be so important. My best guess was some kind of valuable movie memorabilia. I was wrong. Sometimes on my tours, while guests were taking pictures, people would tell me I had disappeared from their photos, and it was true. In a lot of the pictures people showed me, you could see a portion of a blurred, half-transparent finger, or a portion of my face, or my clothing hiding in the background of their shots. Sometimes half my body would be there and the other half vanished. It's easy enough to explain. Some cameras are still not so great at capturing motion, but guests at the Stanley live for that stuff, so I usually play into it. It wasn't easy to explain anymore the first time that I phased through an object. I was reading, and when I tried to turn the page, I missed. That's all it was. A mild, private embarrassment highlighting a severe lack of depth perception. A silly and forgettable moment until I missed again a second later, and then again. No matter how many times I tried to pinch the page, I would watch the tip of my index finger pass right through the paper. I blamed it on sleep deprivation at first, but the more it happened, the more I struggled to find rational explanations. Forks, hairbrushes, makeup, more and more things were falling out of my grasp, through my fingers, through my hands even. Everything culminated 2 mornings ago when I couldn't grab the doorknob to leave my room. I convinced myself I was losing my mind, convinced all I needed to do was focus harder. Just grab the damn doorknob. But each time, my hand would pass right through it like I was missed. In a moment of frustration and exhaustion, I screamed and banged my fists against the door. I passed right through it. I nearly toppled down the stairs just outside my room. I looked back. The door was still closed. I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't. I didn't want to. Ghosts aren't real. I told my boss that afternoon that day would be my last for a while. I needed a break. I needed time away from the hotel. Some fresh air somewhere warmer for a while. My ability to grab things came and went throughout the day. I started encouraging the guests to open the doors for themselves. They liked it. It added to the scare if they had to lead themselves through the passages. They had no idea it was because I was too scared to find out if I could open the door myself. That evening, at the end of the last tour of the night, we ended at that old rundown house. It was the first time I had been there that day. It's more common for my tours to end there at night, probably because I'm antsy to be done for the day and rush the later tours. I hadn't been able to grab anything that entire tour. I was letting the last few lingering tourists out of the building when the door at the end of the hall caught my eye. I couldn't help it. I had to know. My heart beat faster as I took my first step towards the door. I don't know why. I'd been in the room 100, 1,000 times, but this felt different. Was I about to discover the last secret of the Stanley Hotel? Did I even want to? I took a few more steps, passing the first doorway on the left. The door slammed shut. I screamed. Damn it, pull it together. Pull yourself together. I resisted an impulse to slap myself for no other reason than to imitate the cartoons I watched as a kid. I passed the next doorway, braced for it to close at any second. Nothing. I glanced in as I passed it. Piles of junk appliances and strips of plywood plastered flickering silhouettes of imaginary monsters onto the drywall. My eyes turned and focused on the last door. The room was silent. Not even a single creak from the floorboards beneath my feet. I reached the door and raised a hand, outstretching a single finger towards the top lock. The tip passed right through. I held in a gasp and pushed my finger further into the doorway. Soon my entire finger vanished behind the metal door. I couldn't resist. I pushed further. My hand followed, then my wrist, then my arm as far as I could manage. I took a step. My foot passed through it as well. By another step and I was through. The room was nearly completely dark. I could make out a few shapes, a series of lumps that looked like piled boxes around the floor. Something stuck out in front of them, something closer. I bent down closer. My eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. I could make out a little more. Legs. Human legs. My stomach caught in my throat. I followed the limbs up higher with my eyes. The torso slumped at a severe angle, trying to collapse fully to the floor, but half caught on the boxes behind it. Then I saw her face, and I screamed. Not because she was dead, but because she was me. Echoes in the abandoned hospital, my terrifying night shift encounter. I'd been a security guard for almost 20 years, but nothing could have prepared me for the eerie silence of the old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The building, once a bustling hub of life and healing, had been closed for over a decade, its walls now crumbling and covered in ivy. Most of the locals avoided it, claiming it was haunted, but I didn't believe in ghosts. I took the job because it was quiet, the pay was decent, and I didn't mind being there. The first few nights were uneventful. The only sounds I heard were the distant hum of the city, the occasional creak of the building settling, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I would make my rounds, walking the long, dimly lit corridors, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hospital's rooms were empty, the beds long removed, and the medical equipment left behind was covered in a thick layer of dust. But then, about a week into the job, things began to change. It all started with the footsteps. I was on the 3rd floor, checking the old surgery wing, when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. At first, I thought it might be an animal, a raccoon or a stray cat that had wandered inside. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too heavy. They sounded like someone was wearing boots, just like mine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and strained to listen. The footsteps stopped as soon as I did. I shone my flashlight down the hallway, but it was empty. Nothing but peeling wallpaper and broken tiles. Slowly, I started walking again, and after a few steps, the footsteps resumed, this time closer. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty corridor. There was no response, just the sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. I turned around quickly, shining my light behind me, but there was nothing there. The footsteps stopped again. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I was a seasoned guard, and I wasn't about to let some old building get the best of me. I finished my rounds that night without incident, but the footsteps stayed with me, lingering in my mind like a bad dream. The next night, things escalated. I was on the second floor, near the old maternity ward, when I noticed something strange. One of the doors, which I was certain had been closed and locked, was now slightly ajar. I frowned, shining my flashlight into the room. It was empty, of course, just an old, dusty room with a cracked window and peeling paint. But as I stepped inside to check it out, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dust on the floor had been disturbed, as if someone had walked through it recently. I could see clear footprints leading from the door to the far wall, where they abruptly stopped. My hand tightened on my flashlight, my skin prickling with fear. I had been the only one in the building for hours. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without me knowing. I quickly backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I checked every door that night, making sure every door was locked, every window secured. But as I made my way back to my station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Over the next few nights, the disturbances grew more frequent. Doors that had been locked were found open, objects were moved, and the footprints followed me wherever I went. One night, I found a wheelchair in the middle of the hallway, its wheels still spinning as if it had just been pushed. Another night, I discovered a light on in one of the rooms, a light that shouldn't have been working, given that the building had no power. I started to lose sleep. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of footprints echoing in my mind. I became jumpy, nervous, constantly looking over my shoulder. I even started to doubt my sanity. Maybe I was imagining things, I told myself. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something was wrong with the hospital. Something that didn't want me there. One night, as I was making my rounds, I heard a door slam behind me. I turned around, my heart racing, and saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was dark, but I could just make out the shape of a person. Tall, thin, and unmoving. "Who's there?" I called out, but the figure didn't respond. It just stood there, staring at me, its face hidden in the shadows. My hand shook as I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. But when the light fell on the figure, it vanished. There was nothing there. No one standing in the hallway, no sound, nothing. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't finish my rounds that night. Instead, I returned to my station, locked the door, and sat with my back to the wall, my eyes fixed on the door. The footsteps didn't follow me that night, but I could still hear them, faint and distant, echoing through the empty hallways of the old hospital. I didn't return to work after that. I quit the next day, leaving the keys on the desk without a word. The hospital remains abandoned, its hallways still haunted by the echoes of the past. And me, I never talk about what happened during those long, lonely nights at the old hospital. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of footsteps echoing in my ears.